So welcome everybody to our December 2023 Collaborative Change Library Author Jam. It is wonderful to be amongst you. Hello, Carol, Ryan, Birgit, Dave, Steve, and Lisa. Theo Ford-Stiegler from Nexus for Change here. And we just sort of already dove right in, and I think maybe Ryan and Birgit will just run with that impulse, unless there's something else that is bubbling for you right now. But the idea of how do we make tangible this thing that we're after. Ryan offered the thought a moment ago before we hit the record button as to what are the monuments of change? How do we understand what we've done and why we're doing it? And Birgit sort of offered in response that, well, what's the value of creating monuments if we should spend time and energy on making the change that we want to see? So I'll just leave that door wide open for any of you to jump on that.
Could I throw a hot topic question out there for you all to react to in response to or building off of Birgit? So I've been working on an initiative with the Academy of Management around the future of organization development and change. Part of that has looked at doctoral education, and it sort of has evolved into doctoral education needs to know what the future of the field is, going to like, what do we want the future to be? Interestingly, we of any professional field, we are the only one to not pause and ask agree on what is the field about, what does it mean, what are the competencies, and to professionalize it. We're the only one. And when I look at the books, the textbooks and stuff, they are all over the place. And so what's evolving is doing a study to ask thought leaders in the field, academics, practitioners, scholar practitioners, leaders in organizations, people that do OD&C work, and so forth, and to ask them questions about what does this field need to be, kind of looking at the past, but also looking at the future. I think monuments are maybe a bit of a different concept, but to what degree do we need to be thinking about our past and looking at that and asking people what they think is important? Like, what are the most important concepts? What are the most important articles? What are the most important theories? What are the most important things that we need to bring forward into the future? Because I can tell you right now, when I look at the books, you go look up Google OD&C and change management books, they are 700 pages and they are all organized in different ways. And if I was coming into the field and trying to bring people in to help nurture them into the future of the field, I think it's now a wall. It's not inviting.
Interesting. Yeah. When I was first attracted to the Collaborative Change Library, now 3 or so years ago, I thought, now this is the future. Articles that can be put together and basically made available to the world much more quickly than the usual 18 to 30-month cycle that some of the articles in at least my field, management, take to get to the reader, and then they don't because they're not that easily available on paper journals. So And my point is that there's whatever we do going forward to bring formalized thought to people's practices, it ought to be digital. It ought to be fast to revise when we learn something new.
Yeah.
In other words, it's a living literature. Because I've been fortunate now to have had conversations in Zoom with quite a large spectrum of people generally in the org change field. And the first message that I get every time is, I say, well, my book's digital. Why don't you go look at it? They're saying, where can I find it? I said, look at your phone. Click, click, click. You're in. It's there. It'll be with you wherever you need it. And given the fact that a lot of our folks are actually in organizations doing change work or I've been invited to help that process. They need something very quick to get at. Then they can click their way in, search quick. Okay, I've got a thought. Let me keep going forward. Now, I know that sounds like we're kind of cheapening and weakening and watering the literature, but 700 pages, Steve, and I've seen those books. Come on, the least we can break out of that particular monument. So there's my diatribe.
Like, how do you do? Like, Birgit, as you think about what you were saying, and I think Ryan was you were thinking, I think you two are talking kind of different things a little bit, but I think there's an important connection there, because I have a sense of how do we build our future? Like, how do we put you two together and think about the future of this work? But your two thoughts, your perspectives.
I think there needs to be a completely transformative perspective that's offered into all this. So one dimension of that is that we are coming out of an era in which masculine thought, I'm not talking about males, I'm talking about masculine thought, masculine energy was dominant for a very long time. And it's the advent in this time of feminine energy having its place within the field of OD. There has not been a lot of space, from my perspective, in feminine energy. Feminine energy tends to go into the unseen world more than the seen world. I'm overgeneralizing here to make my point. So there's the masculine energy that relies heavily on the five senses and sometimes some gut reaction to something. And the feminine energy that's goes deeply into the unseen world by its nature, and we're entering that time. So, for example, in the questions you asked, Steve, which are the questions of, here's like the definition of what it means to be professional and to take this field into this new whatever of professional, but we're dragging stuff from the past that doesn't belong. And I'm not talking about big books. What I'm talking about is, where's the question of recognizing that the field as an energy, it has a shape, it has something that can be picked up, and the question becomes to sit in silence, not to have all this analysis, and to say, what does the field itself, like this energy field, want from us? And from my perspective, until a profession like this is willing to have those kinds of conversations, those kinds of perspectives, and consider them legitimate, it's not going to find its way into its best future. So I love to ask, like within what I'm doing with our own organization, it's that question, what does the field want from us? And I learned that from Ann Stadler.
Yeah, talked about her last time. I love that idea. What does the field want from us? What is the energy? Basically, what I've been doing with all these different podcasts is to sort of like, in this here, I'm listening for the energy, and over here, I'm listening for the words. And here's a quick example of how coincidental this conversation is. This week, I featured an Australian gentleman named Don Denoon. Some of you may know. He's a very, very nice and smart man. And after I posted my thoughts on the episode, he sent me an email, and among the things he said, which were all complimentary and so forth, he said, I have been rethinking my tagline. I am now putting myself forward as Director of New Futures. And I thought, that's kind of bold, director of New Futures. But here he is. He's probably mid-career and has his own sensibilities about where he'll be needed as a consultant or as a writer and things that we are. Director of New Futures. Maybe the gist of the future of organization change is to have our focus in our literature and our conversations on new futures with our clients and with our students and so forth, which means that we're going to have to be more feminine in our preparation for offerings of what about the new future, because I'm a clunky old male who's chunked out things for my whole career that I think a lot of it's pretty much by the board. And I think some of us males have some real difficulty letting go of our intellect, in quotes, and saying, let's just see what it feels like. Let the unseen speak to us.
Yeah, and I like to ask a question, and it's an honest question. It could come off as, I don't know, insensitive, but it's an honest. I'm really curious. So, what part of the feminine is genetic or physiological as opposed to other? Like, when we think of the feminine, is it a quality of women genetically, or is it a quality of people, and men have generally been, and women have generally been moved in the direction of feminine, masculine? I'm just curious what like Birgit, what do you, as you look at that, what do you know of, is there anything that you could shed light on for me to think about that?
Yeah, all of us have masculine and feminine energy, and we can access it. We can figure out how to use each of those energies and the balance of the two wisely and well. Something I chose to do some time back to help myself understand those two energies better was to take the big old volume, not in Chinese, but the English translation of the I Ching book. And it's a phenomenal leadership development book from my perspective. That's how I teach from it, because there's 64 trigrams in the I Ching, and the first one is pure masculine energy. The second one is pure feminine energy. And the third one is integrated, balanced energy. Then all the rest of them in threes, like 4, 5, 6, and so on, are a combination of those. So, for example, when Rishon, and I apologize if I'm saying your name wrong. I have an idea I am, but when he said, "Oh, wouldn't it be great to do something?" and I could see the artist in him, and that was a beautiful feminine energy, the attractor field, the creativity as it showed up in that instant. And I came back, without wanting to offend, but I hope I didn't, but with what is a very decisive masculine energy of that doesn't work for me. Like, and I'm aware inside myself when I'm using that energy or when I'm using feminine energy. So it's got nothing to do with gender. It's got nothing to do with your physical makeup. It's to do with understanding that you can access those energies inside yourself. Now, some people have way more masculine energy. One of my sons, I would just say pure masculine. One of my daughters, lots of masculine. The other daughter, less masculine. We're all a makeup of
Right.
of both, and
That's wonderful.
integrated. And there was an associate of Angeles Arians science named Dr. Melinda Maxwell, and she studied the I Ching and turned it into a drumming pattern. She was and it's fascinating to drum the I Ching because when you're drumming, all the trigrams that are just masculine, you can feel that energy in you. Like it's like, wow, when you're drumming all the ones that are feminine, you can feel that. Then you have to, if you do that, do the integrated ones, or else you're out of kilter.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I do think that there are some of my, and I think this is really cool. When I look at Gurian's, Michael Gurian, what's his? Yeah, Michael Gurian. He does work on boys. He's got it's around work with young men and boys and so forth, but it's the Gurian Institute. He's written a lot about it. Talks a lot about how boys are different than girls and how the education system early on is really designed for girls and the way their brains work and so forth. And boys and girls communicate differently and have different needs. So there are certain biological aspects and brain functioning aspects. And like and looking at evolutionary psychology, some of the literature around the evolutionary psychology talks about how, for example, over time, women have developed the ability to multitask where men don't do that so well. And the reason is because women were oftentimes taking care of children and also taking care of the space that they were in. And while the men would go out hunting and gathering, but they would go out hunting, their job was to focus on one thing and like go after it. Well, the women, and so now they have shown in the literature that women have the ability, when they look at brain activity in women, literally the brain activity when women are asleep is higher than men when they're awake. Or not higher, but more. A woman's brain is more active more active than a male's, and they cross over both sides. Their brains are able to work on both sides, where men tend to work on one side or the other at a time. But women's brains are more active when they're asleep than a male's when he's awake, for example. And that boys' brains will shut down and they literally will not think at all. Where a woman's brain will continuously be thinking and noticing. And so this is the brain science team. But I wonder how much this plays into the ability of a woman to be more feminine, or the ability to pay attention to more things, whereas a male, and then they talk, and Gurian talks about how boys, the way they communicate is like physical. They communicate through hitting, throwing, and bumping, and that kind of stuff. But that's, again, we could equate that to be more masculine. And so I don't know. I've been just kind of looking. I was thinking about that kind of stuff with my boys. I have 3 boys.
I think we have to be really careful, and this doesn't, it's difficult in some languages to translate this, that there's the spectrum of male to female. It's a spectrum because, but that's different than masculine and feminine energy.
Right.
So I just want to emphasize that, because there's so many wonderful boys that are very high in their feminine energy, and like they don't want to do the bumping and so on. They want to they want to be caring, and they're nurturers, and then somebody ridicules them for playing with a doll and so on. So I want to be very careful with that, to decouple feminine and masculine energy from biological male or biological female. They're not the same thing.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead,
I
Ryan.
think we're talking about the binary nature, right? And the cultural and for historical, proclivity to separate, and that as the male energy has accumulated a competitive nature in this fast, closing space, moving to the detriment of women and feminine energy and fields. And I wonder if it's certainly there's a field around needing to integrate coming forth, but what happens in outside of the field of change, right? We have masculine energy and feminine energy integrating in a spirit of love to create the birth of a new life, so that we steward it. What do we do with new life? And I think that, and maybe this is where for me, in the practice of why is the music so important? Because it is releasing that play to receive and give and receive and to create a piece of art together. And I think this also comes into what are the shibboleths of business and organizations. You can't talk about love. How dare you talk about love in an organization? And that's, I think, and that's part of this missing integration. And then how do we fall in love as professionals, and how do we dance, and how do we create and make music together? And I think that's maybe this is not a quantitative, we publish this, publish that, we do this study and that, we do this analysis of the psychobiology of ourselves and how we behave, and create those artifacts, those quantitative things. But what is the practice and the profession of qualitative acceptance of the study of love and how people come together, and of all biologies, but beyond those biologies to come together and integrate those energies? I think that is exciting, and that feels like a maybe a vanguard place to dip into. So
yeah, I love that notion you said, Ryan, about bringing forth new life. And basically, when we collaborate about what we consider our organization, our goal is to give it new life, to keep it going, to get it beyond. And certainly any business organization, if they really thought about it, would understand what we mean by keeping your business alive, keeping your customers with you, and rather than abandoning you, which essentially, when you see businesses die these days, it's because their customers say, we don't need what you do anymore. So there's a lot of that whole thing about not just renewal, and sometimes bringing something to life that never apparently existed before, is what a lot of people now call entrepreneurial accomplishment. But I think we are in the business of love and life. I know, Steve, that doesn't translate nicely to a prospectus for a graduate program these days. They'll
actually it does. We just had, like, last night, and I got this email about revising our webpage to describe what our field is about. I'll put the link in there. It's like crazy. They somehow, without letting me know, they got some group that is redesigning the statement of what our program is for potential students, some marketing group. And this group took our website, which we have developed with our students and with our prospective student focus groups, to create language that people say, when they find it, they go, this is where I want to be. And so then some marketing, and I read it, and it looked like they threw all our website language into ChatGPT and asked it to flower.
That was my guess.
Asked it to flower it up.
Yeah.
I can put, I wonder if I can put
that was my guess.
And we're probably, I'll
Go
just,
ahead.
yeah.
and so what was crazy was the language. What I find is that people that are interested in this field, there's a certain kind of language that describes the human side to change, and there needs to be love. We have a student in our doctoral program doing her dissertation on love.
Yeah, I remember her.
Okay.
Yeah.
And students were challenging in the doctoral program. Students were challenging her saying they were we have doctoral students that are HR professionals and so forth. That's not going to fly in HR, and that's not going to fly in organizations. And then someone brought her over to me and said, Steve, can you talk? And they came over, and I said, I looked at him, I said, I kind of indignantly said, you got to be kidding me. We are creating organizations that check head, heart, and brains and soul at the door, expecting people
Yes.
to come in and
Exactly.
be automatons or robots. And love has a place. It's actually written about, researched, and people feel it's really important. So that put me in. I went and found like a whole bunch of citations and sources. I put together a whole reference list for the student to help her because she was questioning whether or not she should do the research. You know? So it's like, I think it does fit. I just think, what's the language? What is the language that communicates what we do in a way that allows love to be in the language in a way that is still, and that it's also credible? When you look at ChatGPT flowering it up, it feels, I don't know if that's feminine, masculine. I don't know how to reconcile all that other than to say it doesn't feel substantive enough to give love a compelling case.
How
When
could
It's
it?
it's in the right direction.
How could it?
It's just flowery. It doesn't resonate.
There you go. See, we males think something, not to pick on you, but we think sometimes if something has some of those, in quotes, soft words in them, we think it's flowery.
But just
And
to let
yet
you
what
know,
I'm
I
hearing
was the
is-
only male in the group defending love with a group of women who
Yeah.
were telling me it doesn't have a place in the workplace.
Yeah. Well,
It
you
would be
know,
inappropriate.
if they have suffered from that, perhaps more than our gender, for sure, over the eons, women have suffered the lack of the barriers to being human and kind and loving and fun and all those things. Leave it at the door. I've seen this my whole 60 years of study. It's maybe this is when it's got to change. Maybe the events of the world today are showing us how completely wrong it is to create organizations that hurt people who work in them by virtue of not allowing them to be flowery even.
Yeah, I think part of it is an English language challenge that
Oh yeah, very limited.
we have this word love where like, oh my goodness, I love these Cheetos is the same word as, darling, I love you, that you would say to your spouse of 40 years. And they're maybe slightly different concepts. You have some of the older languages, my dad's a Hebrew scholar, like in the biblical Hebrew, you have, I think, 3 different words for divine love that all are trying to capture different nuances for love for creator and so on and so on and so forth. So I think that's part of that conundrum that we have, people saying, oh, there's no place for love. Well, yes, maybe for some kinds of love, there isn't an exact place in your team meetings, but many forms of it, yes, there is.
Yeah. See what you got us started on, Birgit?
No, it wasn't me.
Well,
Go ahead, Karen.
I'm fascinated by this conversation, and there's so many routes to go on. The first one is, Birgit, I'm so fascinated by your perspective because my experience is so much with you of the difference between feminine and masculine and male and female and how they get confused or not integrated. But I go back as you do to remembering the women's movement, right? You were part of it as I was. And Dave, you were in that arena. We have a generational gap here with a little bit in the middle. And I've said many, many times that the biggest benefit of the women's movement was for men. I worked in a highly male-oriented environment. I was around when women couldn't be accepted in business schools and women couldn't be accountants.
That's right.
And the women's movement allowed men to say they were going home at 3 o'clock to be in their children's soccer games. And that didn't happen before. And I'm so aware listening to this that we've lost that history to some extent. And it's really good that it's become part of life. Dual career families are functioning entirely differently now than they did when it was patriarchal.
It's
But
true.
Birgit, when you spoke about your 3 different child types, I wonder if you would have a dinner table conversation with the younger children and see where they come forth in this discussion. I'd be particularly interested to be a fly on the wall with you and Rachel, because you're both in this field. And my answer to what Steve is saying is yes, yes, yes. What we need is to identify the human side that definitely needs integration. And my big banner right now is to not lose the elders' perspective, but to find times when the elders and the youngers, so to speak, are in conversation. Because when I look in these Zoom screens, it's very rare that it's cross-generational. So that's the
Yeah.
end of my comment. Oh, Rian says an open space event with a theme of the feminine. And definitely intergenerational.
Yeah.
And Mary Parker Follett, of course. She's very rarely spoken of. And she had such an impact on the field.
She was way, way, way ahead of her time. And
And one of our dear heroes is Barbara Bunker, who tells the story of being a woman and the only way she could get into the field was becoming a doctoral student.
Yeah.
And she was a lone female. So there's so much of this. I think you've raised a really important issue, Birgit.
one thing that Birgit said at the beginning that I heard, it was in conjunction with Steve's initiatives with the academy, and that is who will be attracted to organs development and change, but what will attract them. And her point, as I heard it, well, first and foremost, energy, the energy coming from us who claim to be in it, and we are, but what energy comes, and that then the words, fancy or not, thanks to AI, will follow, and then the place, which would be a college or a university, whatever, but the energy. And my guess is that the early thinkers in our general field, before they had any credentials or anything else that said that this is organization development work is their future, is they felt that energy. They've got it from someone. And it made them want to peel away from the conventional descriptions of their work and say, I'm self-proclaimed here as someone who cares a lot about the caliber of organizations that people work in. And I think I can organize people to think about that and make the future better than the past. So, and I love the very wide avenue for people to come into this work, organization development and change, organization leadership, however you name it. And yet, you reach a certain point where they definitely need credential to get back into some of these dying companies that don't even know they're dying. Well, I'll let you in, but first you got to show me your doctorate. Okay, you can come in and talk to us. That kind of mindset. So yeah, energy attracts.
And it repels.
Yeah, it
Powerfully
does.
so.
Steve, this is an amazing group of references. Thank you.
When I took my undergraduate studies, they were all in psychology. And where I come from in Canada, they didn't have at the time organizational development as a graduate level option, but I had organizational psychology.
Yeah.
So that was useful. When I attempted to apply all that I'd learned and so on and so forth, I felt it was deficit. It was just, and so then what I did was I took myself, we lived very close to an indigenous reservation, the Six Nations reservation. I had the benefit of a couple of elders there that mentored me. And one of the things they said was, you have this kind of all wrong, because I talked about meetings and decision making and this and that. And they said, so when we get together to make a decision, there's the circle of the chiefs surrounded by the circle of the grandmothers. And they said, so we know we have an important decision to make. And we know we're going to be there passing the talking stick and whatever all the ceremonies are until we're done. And if one of the chiefs says something that isn't for the benefit of his community, his tribe that's represented, the grandmother behind him will let him know that he's working from ego instead of working from wisdom. And so there's a check and balance in the system.
Oh, I love that.
But they also said to me, and if the decision can't be made that year, we go away and we go check in with our tribe and we come back the following year to make the decision. And this fast-paced what you're teaching, what you're doing in your organizations ultimately is not going to work. So one of the guidances I received from that was to go deep, to go slow, to go fast. And so the work I put out into the world at this time, I'm refusing to do the quick-paced, the short blurbs, as though that information nugget is going to affect somebody's wisdom. It's going to be the deeper. It's going to be accompanied by art. We have art in what we teach. It's symbolic art. We have, so it's always accompanies what we're saying and teaching. We have music. All of those are necessary. So what those elders guided me to do was to look outside of what we knew as organizational development and really go into what we refer to as the healing arts and have a whole training, which I did. I'm a really good open space technology facilitator because I studied Reiki, for example. And I would hope that the future of organizational development acknowledges its limitations and really goes out further into the other arts.
Yeah, we use the word development, human development, personal development, leadership development, organization development. To me, nothing develops if it doesn't continue to live on and exceed anyone's expectations of its potential. So the healing arts are practiced by people who believe we can indeed heal and develop and grow from that moment. And that sensibility of believing in development has to come through. Or we can take that word out, put something else in there. That's just my point of view. Change is one thing. Development's a whole big other thing. Change is going to happen one way or another. Development as a result of how we change is the big question. And we can't do that with linear, algorithmic kinds of solutions, which is what AI can bring to the table. We're the ones who have to say, if you want to develop, you got to break down, push this throat, pull that loose, and wing it for a minute or two or a month or a year, as your colleagues in the Native American community do. So there's a lot of, you've already helped us today learn. Bridget, I've got to read I Ching, and I have to learn more about Native American, Native, not American, but Native ways of making decisions. It seems to me it's kept them around here about 10,000 years longer than us.
Birgit, I had to step away, so I'm not sure this may be a repeat, and you've referenced this already, but to me, what comes up is that grounding in the idea of the 7 generations, that everything that's happening right now that I decide to do is both influenced and informed by, whether I realize it or not, the 7 generations before me, and has impact and influence on not just my kids and my grandkids, but 7 generations in front of me. And if we were to but take a breath for a second and consider that when we make decisions for ourselves and others. I try to get better at, I don't usually get to 7, but I try to at least remember, like, you know, I started my thinking for our time together with remembering my grandmother, like, wait a minute, what would she say? And the most beautiful thing that came up, maybe this is a strange sidebar, but one of my cousins spoke at grandma's memorial and basically shared that the biggest gift she got ever from her grandmother is basically the encouragement to say, you know, this is how I lived as a woman, but they happen to both be pastors' wives. This is how I lived being a woman and a wife, and a pastor's wife specifically. That doesn't mean that you have to do that. You have to find your own way of doing that. But hopefully I've given you some inspiration as to what direction you can now take that to. And it doesn't have to look like what I did. It doesn't have to have the same values alignments that I carried. But hopefully it's informed by what I carried.
Teo, to go along with that, because I also adhere to that, what I go along with as well as that is in your generational, you know, your family line and so on. Every family has patterns, and patterns that are for well-being, harmony, and patterns that are for disharmony. And so the question, and it's a beautiful question, is, are you the one that the family lines have been waiting for to break this pattern? And I love that. And I've spent some time this year making a series of videos, Zoom videos for my kids. I have four adult kids and lots of grandkids, but I in each video I said, so here's the pattern of that part of your family. And are you able to break that pattern by, and offered some suggestions? So that's something that I really wanted to do as a mother and grandmother, to ask them, are they willing to be the pattern breaker? And the current videos I'm on are about my patterns. I'd like them to break all those for the generational cycles.
I love that idea. The pattern
Oh.
breaker. Yeah. Lisa, You're working in a real world company. Are you ready to be a pattern breaker there?
I hope so. So between Carol's comments, which I just laughed and then put in the chat that my undergrad is accounting and management, which were the two she said you couldn't be part of a long time ago. So that was interesting
right.
to
The
make the
first,
connection.
Lisa, the first women were allowed into Harvard's MBA program in 1971.
Mhm. That's right.
I mean, that's not so long ago in some
Switzerland
ways,
didn't
right?
allow women to vote until I think it's 71. It's
Wow.
yeah.
And in the honor of the spirit that Birgit brought, that was in the past.
Right. So Lisa, what's in your presence?
Unless they take away our vote.
Well, and so those contributions that let me get those degrees are much larger, but I mean, I at least feel like I started it from my one Blinken Light town, the only Mexican family when I was growing up, and kind of leadership. I'd say my mom, even though she isn't the Mexican side of my family, but in just having her profession and just how she's been a pillar in the community and such. So that led to me being the, I guess, outlier in my family. I'm the only one who's, just took a different path. So that's not bad, but I mean, it's just different. So I guess my initial reactions here, because there's so many based on everything that's been brought up, is just that we talk about masculine, feminine, we talk about male or female when Dr. Katie brought up his points and energy versus say, in like corporate where I am, something that they would see as concrete as, whether it's evidence-based, et cetera. And I think the energy piece is just not well proven to those folks who dismiss it. And I feel like that whole starting with the definition of ODNC, where it needs to go, what that future is, my mind was just kept going back to when that is determined or there's a vision there, how does that translate into the education for ODNC, but then also what is that piece that can be inserted into just management in general, so that there from the get is a relevancy there, that when I go and I be a manager, I know it exists. I know that I need to be considerate of this is proven and it works and it has an energy, and there's things there that I may not see as concrete that I need to consider. That was just where my brain was going as everyone was adding and building upon each other. And that's certainly what I see, because I know that in my 20 plus years in corporate, you are kind of drilled into of the fast, not the slow down, Birgit, the fast and the getting it accomplished. And if it's not, concrete in everyone's mind who's contributing, then it's dismissed and it's not considered. So I think that's my brief contribution.
Well, that should be recorded and analyzed, Lisa, by people who are thinking about any aspect of organization work, including managing, and particularly managing, because in many cases it's a man or woman in that role who can insist on concreteness to the extent that it dismisses about everything else people bring, and then toward the other end of the spectrum where they're willing to act on the unseen.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, if it's evidence, it's already happened. It's fact. It's
Yeah.
past.
Yeah. Well, the
So
evidence to
if
me
we're going to
is-
be evidencing our way forward, we're passing our way forward, as opposed to allowing at least the possibility of new thought that will come from intuition. It'll come from looking at a bird flying, something different, and acting on that. At least not only evidence and the things that come with love.
Well, the first piece of evidence to me is just very simple. It's you're working with humans.
Yeah, that start with that.
Like,
Start with Star Trek. we've got the captain.
Boldly go.
And we've got the intuitive that gets called when the captain doesn't know what to do. It's sorry.
They don't ask Spock for everything. they go with a few others. Yeah, Gene there was tuned into something back then, and it was culture changing for a lot of us who watch Star Trek and still talk about it.
Well, I want to riff on the Star Trek thing for a second. Think about the original series. You know, Birgit, you're talking that the original series, and they didn't have that force. But then it was the Next Generation where the empath was brought in, and the wisdom of Counselor Troy to the captain and everyone. And I think that's what are we talking about as a Next Generation? And
there you go.
Ooh.
There's a good theme for back to Steve's work, the next generation, because that's what graduate schools have promised in every field. The next generation of physicians, the next generation of accountants. And believe me, the next generation of accountants will not be taught what you were taught in your accountant studies, Carol. So much of that has changed. I even had an accounting professor come to me. I've been away for 8 years, but she came to me and she said, all right, I'll admit it, Dave. Accounting has an awful lot to do with human behavior, what you teach and leadership and everything else. And I said, why did you come to that realization? She said, because the tools of the trade are basically being rendered obsolete. And now we're looked at for the quality of our conversations with our clients in regard to how they can use numbers, but the numbers they can get anywhere. Now they want to know meaning. And so we've got to become much more conversant. And I said, great, get started with your accounting majors. It's changing. So yeah, it's a good time to be having this conversation. And with our last 3 minutes, I think we should defer to Steve.
I'm not sure why.
Well, because you raised a really big issue, which is a good one, which is what is the field in the future?
There's two fundamental principles for me that I think make it quite simple to address. And my wife will tell you that I always say everything's simple and easy to do. Whenever we talk, how are we going to do this? That's simple. We can do it. She's like, would you stop saying that? You keep saying everything's so simple, and it's not easy. And I go, but I tend to believe that. That's probably why I do a lot of crazy things, because I don't know better. I'm the engine that could, I think. But I think it is collaborative. Number one, we need to just do a good job of giving people a thoughtful, organized, documented way to contribute to the conversation so that we can build it. What I have seen in the field, and I talk to everybody, a lot of opinions, no real clear aggregating of thought in a collaborative, intentional way that like the Collaborative Change Library does, and the processes that you all advocate for. The processes you advocate for do that, and they ensure that people not only talk, but that we somehow document and build on the conversation, because we got to have iterative building, and it's got to be messy, and it's got to be divergent and convergent and divergent and convergent. But I think it's straightforward. I think that's the first thing that we gotta do, and then use that to build a structured framework for how we move something forward in a very practical way, and not lose sight of what matters.
That's great. I'm putting
Birgit
in
looked like she was going to say something though. I saw her move her lips.
Okay, Birgit.
Sorry, I was writing an accompaniment to what Stephen was saying. Everything's interconnected in an organization. I mean, everything's interconnected in the universe. But if we take an organization, everything's interconnected between organizations. And so this leads to collaborative capacity as essential. And so just putting that sentence out there to support what Stephen was saying. And I think it's important to think in terms of collaborative capacity, not just in terms of let's collaborate, because it's a capacity that has to be developed.
I put in the
Thanks.
chat a conversation that Tennyson, who's missing today, we miss him, and I had on his podcast. And it's there for you if you can grab it. And every bit of that conversation was collaborative conversation between two collaborative change authors. And if we can do more of that, I'm certainly volunteering my podcast for those conversations, because once you listen to them, things come out that we didn't know we thought. And I think that's an example of how spontaneity is perhaps not well rated these days. Spontaneity is extremely important, and it comes out in conversations like we've had today. No script, no agenda, but we've evolved a real interest in the future of the field.
Dare I say we
I
were
bet-
practicing collaborative improvisation.
We were.
Weren't we having an author jam today? Wasn't that
Yeah.
right?
We
The jam
jammed all
session?
right. Now let me find the peanut butter. No, this has been wonderful. I know we're a minute over, but sorry I did a lot of the talking, but you got me going.
This is great.
I've
Nice
had
to be with
fun
you all. It's nice to be with you all. Have a wonderful day.
and wonderful holidays.
Yes,
Thank
wonderful
you, you
holidays.
too.
And since this is the December Author Jam, we say back home, einen guten Rutsch ins neue Jahr, which means a smooth slide into 2024.
A new year, 2024. Let's all make it. Yes.
See you
Happy
next
New
year,
Year.
guys.
Merry
Bye.
Christmas.
See you, everybody.